You also have some recent publications out as well, right, Ross?
Yeah, last fall, my colleagues and I published a book that is the summary of our research over the last 4 years with objects in museums around the world. We went to several museums in different countries, the 9/11 Museum in New York City, the War Childhood Museum in Sarajevo, the Happy Museum in Derby, England, the Derby Museum, which is part of the Happy Museum project, and the FIT, Fashion Institute of Technology and Museum in New York. And we looked at what is the experience of people interacting with objects, whether those objects are clothing, like at the Fashion Institute Museum, or objects from 9/11 at the 9/11 Museum, objects of war from Sarajevo, or personal objects, objects that people cherish in their homes at the Derby Museum. And we, in those 4 different contexts, we looked at how people feel about meaningful objects, whether it's a first responder carrying a shard of the 9/11 steel around in his pocket, a little tiny fragment of the Twin Towers in his pocket, or a woman from the UK who interacts with a museum object that's an ancient oil lamp that was made 2,000 years ago in a part of the world that she is from. We looked at how people respond to objects that are meaningful and how they feel about that. And what we found was that there's a very deep connection between objects and healing. There's a very deep connection between objects of meaning and healing. Objects often are made through creative practices. Meaningful objects typically are made that way. Objects of art or objects of craft. And we connect to these objects. And we have very strong and deep feelings about them. So my colleagues and I developed a kind of psychotherapeutic approach to working with objects, where we developed a protocol of helping people to connect with the emotions they hold about certain meaningful objects, and to connect those objects to the stories of their lives. And that book came out, I don't know, a few months ago now. And it describes the research that we did and the results that came out from that. I have another thing coming out. It's been delayed a little bit because of a pandemic, but I also do a lot of work in the natural environment, in nature, and I'm interested in the role that nature plays in our well-being and health and healing. And many people have noticed and written about the positive benefits of going for a walk in nature. Mm-hmm. And in my own professional practice, I've done a lot of different things in nature, everything from taking groups of people into the Amazon rainforest to taking people on, short walks in municipal parks. And one of the things I found is that the emotional benefit of those experiences is pretty similar, whether you're in the Amazon rainforest or you're in a municipal park. Just going for a walk, like we were talking about way back at the beginning of this conversation, the act of slowing down, the act of being more present, the act of taking time to reflect on what's happening around you, listening to the birds or watching the spring flower. These kinds of experiences are deep and meaningful on their own, but they also lead inward. They lead us to a relationship with the inner life that we don't get enough of. We're kind of impoverished about in the modern age. So that work is on the website. It's in the resources section of the website.
Okay. And are you encouraged by what you see on your walks around your neighborhood with, your community? Or have you noticed there's a greater uptake in connection, even if it might be 6 feet away?
It's humans. So the answer is it's complicated.
Yeah.
I do think that people are taking time to get outside more when they feel safe to get outside. I also do notice that there's so much anxiety that you mentioned, in your description of the reaction that people have to first responders now. There's so much anxiety about getting close to people. Mm-hmm. And so there are those people who anxiously stay very far away, 20 feet or more away. And then there are those people who seem to be in every neighborhood who just don't really get it. And they don't respect or honor or take seriously the idea, the guideline about staying far away. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, I think. I think people are happy to be able to get outside and have time to go outside, but but they're also anxious about going outside because they might be in a situation where they get too close to somebody. So it's a mixed bag, I think.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting that you look at it from that perspective. I know I live across from Serpentine Hills and Tynehead Park, and that trail is absolutely packed now. And I'm like, as I'm riding my bike with my family, I'm feeling like there's a bit of a silver lining in that maybe people are naturally learning how to slow down a little bit more and reconnect with parks that you know, you and I are distance runners, so we're used to seeing some pretty sparsely populated parks.
Mhm.
And now I'm starting to see more people, and hopefully that essence of connection and physical exercise isn't lost when this pandemic settles.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the extent to which people might be open to challenging the old way.
Hmm.
Right? Is it possible that we could adjust work a little bit?
Yeah.
Is it possible that we could have a bit more balance around what we do out in the community? You mentioned Tynehead Park. I take groups to Tynehead Park. It's one of the municipal walks that we do. Um, it's interesting. My colleague Lee Bevington, who's a biologist, told me that the Serpentine River, the headwaters of the Serpentine River, are actually underneath the Guildford Mall. And so that river starts
Wow.
in a strange place. It goes through the parks, it meanders through Surrey, and it comes out at Mud Bay. And then it releases the salmon out into the wild. And salmon do some of the largest migrations of any species in the world.
Hmm.
And there are species that is under great distress right now, has been for a
Hmm.
long time, and yet they're very resilient. And yet, in the midst of their struggle and their suffering, they're doing okay. Even though their headwaters are now underneath them all for this little community of salmon over at Tynehead, they're doing okay, right?
It's
And
amazing.
so when we go to the park and we expose ourselves to the natural environment, these kinds of metaphors become really accessible to us. It becomes accessible and possible for us to think about the ways in which we are part of the web of nature, that we are kind of like the salmon. We're struggling right now as well, and we're trying to find our way through. And our environment is not perfect. It's a source of stress on a bunch of fronts, and yet we're doing okay, right? And we can be okay in this. We can get through, and not in a way that we create fake resilience for ourselves and just pretend that we're fine through self-talk, but just being present to the complexity and interdependency of the world, right?
Hmm.
Um, the other metaphor that I really like from our local environment is the metaphor of the Douglas fir tree. So the Douglas fir has a curious kind of style of making its way in the world. Yeah, the branches of the Douglas fir are always higher up on the tree. There's nothing near the ground. And the bark of the Douglas fir tree has a particular chemical composition which makes it resistant to fire. So when a forest fire comes, there are no branches near the ground, so the Douglas fir tree doesn't lose its branches, and the bark resists the fire. So the forest fire passes through the forest, and all the other trees are damaged or destroyed, and the Douglas fir tree is not. The bark is scorched, but the tree otherwise survives. And in the wake of the forest fire, the ground is rich with carbon from the fire, and it's in that environment that the Douglas fir tree reproduces. And so, in some sense, you could make the argument that the Douglas fir tree thrives in the fire. It
Hmm.
needs the fire. And sometimes on local trees, there are, I think, 2 trees in Tynehead Park where you can see this. You can see that the forest fire has come through 100 years ago or so, and there's still scorch marks on the bark, on the low down trunk of the tree on the bark. And there are a lot of trees in Squamish where you can see this, and only a few in this area here because there's been so much logging locally. But in several parks around here, you can see this. And to me, that's a very inspiring sight. It suggests that trauma and difficulty and suffering are part of the path that we take, whether we like it or not, and that we can thrive and survive. And in some ways, we need these difficulties to remind us who we are, what our purpose is, what our story is. And that's one of the reasons why I like ancient stories, because they all talk about this kind of thing. They all use metaphors and images to teach us about what's meaningful and purposeful in human life. And the natural environment is filled with these metaphors, the metaphor of the salmon or the Douglas fir tree, that are immediate reminders of the deep ways in which we are a life form. We are like these other life forms, just trying to make our way through.
Absolutely. I always learn so much from my conversations with you, Ross, and I thank you so much. In fact, as you're telling me about Tynehead, I want to find those trees that you're speaking of on my bike ride with my son.
We're in this moment of great distress right now with lots of activity, and this will pass, as all the old tales tell us, right? This too shall pass. And it might take a while for this to pass. And then we have to ask ourselves, what do we get back to then? What does our new normal look like? And is it a new normal that's diminished because we have greater risks or greater anxiety? Or is it a new normal that is widened and deepened because we recognize some important and meaningful things? One of the things that I'm hearing from people now in this current environment is that this current situation is that they're having more time to connect with family members. They're recognizing the value of being with family. And that is such an easy thing to lose when we get busy. Family is there, they're at home, we can be with them anytime. And we tend to forget about those deep connections, and we just go throughout our day. And now in this moment where we're forced to be with family more, many people are recognizing two things. One is being with family more brings up all the issues that we didn't deal with in our family before, and maybe we should deal with now, which we talked about a while ago. But the other side is, what is the nature of our relationships with people in our lives? What is the purpose of that? And up until the modern era, people spent a lot more time together. People were in smaller groups and larger interconnected families. People spent hours a day in each other's company, and parents spent a lot more time with kids than they do now. There are a lot of people now who live alone. I mean, 100 years ago, basically nobody lived alone. And so we're going through this pandemic challenge during a time also when we've just gone through a large change in our social structure. And so many people are feeling isolated and alone to begin with, and they go into this situation. And so another potential positive outcome of this might be, doesn't have to be, because we don't have to respond to this call, but it might be that we get more mindful about our relationships and be curious about and open to the possibility that deepening our relationships with other people might be a possibility here. There will be a short time in which it's a possibility. Then we're just going to get back to normal, distracted modern life. Mm-hmm. Once that happens, it basically is not impossible, but very difficult to shift gears once you've sped up again to the speed of modern life. So we kind of have to do this before things speed up again. We have to solidify whatever deepening we want to get with ourselves and with our relationships with other people. We have to solidify that now while we have time to do it, because we won't have time later. So it has to be built into the system, to whatever system will emerge after this situation. So I think there's some kind of, not urgency exactly, but there's a possibility here. And if we're mindful to it, who knows what changes each one of us might be able to make in terms of improving the quality of our relationships to ourselves and to other people.
So I think when I hear your conversation here, what we're really talking about is putting some intentionality into slowing things down, into looking at some of the underlying lessons that can be learned through this pandemic, celebrating social connections, getting into nature, seeing resiliency within what's around us, and recognizing that we're connected to nature and the species that live around us. And also that society is changing dramatically. We don't have a lot of control over that, but we have a lot of control over our inner world and how we choose to find meaning through this.
We do have a lot of control over our inner world, especially when we recognize that our inner world is in some ways a reflection of, or a map of, the outer world, the world around us, right? The world around us is the world that we make by way of our relationships to the inner world. they're connected.
Do you have a private clinic even online that people can contact you at, or are you completely out of that world?
No, I do. I'm doing online stuff at the moment, like everybody else is, online consulting for organizations. And I don't work with individual clients. I work with groups and with organizations and teams. So that work continues during the pandemic, and most of it takes place in the context of Zoom calls and those kinds of things, like everybody else. So I'm available for those kinds of things, and anybody is welcome to reach out and just ask me a question about that kind of work that I do. So I'm an infrequent blogger, as many people are, and I tend to focus on the writing that I do for the website in a kind of literary way. I like to tell stories, and I like to think about the connection between small moments and larger themes. And so recently, I've updated the website with a new resources section that has 4 areas. There's an area focused on addictions. And we talked about addictions a fair bit in this conversation. And that area has a section on alcohol and different substances, as well as pathways healing through trauma. And so it's really focused on the continuum between personal development, traumatic experience, and addiction and mental health. All those things are one thing, not 4 different things. So I have a section on that. I have a section on education and possibilities for education. And the museum work that I described a little while ago, some of that is up there as well. And so,
Including your work with the 9/11 Museum,
yeah,
role of symbolism
there's a
and
page
healing.
about the 9/11 work up there. So the resource section is quite well populated with resources for helping with the kinds of challenges that we're facing now. As you and I have discussed before, I'm not big on sort of steps. Here are the 3 steps to become more resilient. It's more organic than that. It's more personal than that. And so I tend to try to share these resources through telling stories and making connections between mythologies and cultures and symbolisms and various kinds. And so the work that I do on the website it's not super, it's not the kind of thing you can, read for 90 seconds and have your takeaway. It's more immersive, and it's intended to be more thorough.
Which is great timing for people to have some downtime and read outside of the box literature, like a lot of the stuff that's on your blog.
Yeah, I'm hoping.
And that's on rosslaird.com, right?
That's correct.
So thank you for your time, Ross. I'm sure I'm gonna get a lot of feedback and interest in our conversation today, and perhaps that could guide us for another conversation down the road as this pandemic unfolds.
Yeah, happy to do so. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks so much for facilitating this today, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.